All right. We've talked about making our own compositions and resizing them. There's going to be times that we maybe want to crop a document, crop an image. So even, right now I have this image and I'm trying to get rid of Kelly Clarkson here. Now, if I were to take this image and resize it smaller, you'll notice that it does make my image smaller, but it makes everything smaller. You know what I mean? It is taking essentially this graphic and taking all of it and shrinking it like so. Okay. And that's not really what I'm trying to do. What I'm really trying to do is keep the dimensions, but get rid of some of the content. I want to basically keep maybe like this part and get rid of the excess part. To do that, what you really need to do is to crop your image. So what we're going to do is grab a crop tool. In Photopea, it's about four down from the top. And you'll notice when I click on it, I get these kind of blue wireframes here with the little squares. This allows me to resize this. And I'm going to crop it to about here. You can confirm this by either hitting the return or the enter key on your keyboard, or you can press this little check mark here, and then boom. Okay. Oops, except I didn't quite crop her all the way out. How about that? That's probably a little bit better. And then let's hit return. Boom. Okay, that's better. So now, I've cropped her out, and that's great. But keep in mind that when you crop, you can perfectly allowed to do this, but that would change the dimensions of your document. So right now, if I go to image size, you'll notice 950 by, 534. After I crop this, let's confirm. And I go back and I view this. Notice how my dimensions are much smaller. Okay, so you're always welcome to, crop if you want to, but just be aware that, that will shrink the size of your, document, and that may not necessarily be what you want to do. So just be aware of that. Um, so when you crop, you can crop, this is what we call a free transform crop, which means I can crop wherever I want. But sometimes you might actually want to crop your document to a specific ratio or a specific size, but you don't necessarily, So what we can do is when you have the crop tool, I'm going to go up here and change this from free to fixed ratio. Now, a ratio means the number between width and height. So a one by one means for every 1 pixel to the right, I go 1 pixel down, or 1 pixel in the vertical, which is essentially a square. So you'll notice when I try to crop this, it always stays in a sort of a square 1 by 1 ratio. If I were to change this to 2 by 1 ratio, you can see that for every 2 pixels to the right, it goes 1 pixel down. So in other words, the width is twice that of the height, no matter what it is. You can also do this by a fixed size. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, I want to make a document that's exactly 300 pixels by, oops, am I not allowed to put pixels? I'm just going to put numbers. There you go. 300 by 300. Um, my- so I'm going to crop this image. And actually what it's going to do is after it crops it, it's going to resize it. So if I go to image size, you can see that this is 300 by 300. Okay. So this can be useful if you want to crop your image to an exact size. This will be helpful, for instance, as I mentioned before, when you get to After Effects, you're going to create compositions that are specific dimensions for standard definition, high definition, 4K and all that good stuff. And they have exact dimensions. They have exact pixel dimensions. And so maybe when I work with a photo, I want to crop it exactly to that. This is how I can do that. All right. So when we talk about When we talk about resizing the image, we resize it bigger or smaller, right? Now that's in it. If I were to resize it, it makes the whole composition bigger or smaller. It takes the whole thing and blows it up, or does the reverse where it takes the whole thing and makes it smaller. What we can do with a canvas resize is we keep the content the same size, but the actual canvas can grow or shrink. Okay. Think of it as like, here, let's imagine if I increase the canvas, it's like this is the same size as this, but I've increased this area here that I can now use to place other images and to draw into and things like that. So I'm going to go to, this is exercise 10, and I'm going to go under image size, and this is set to 900 by 850 roughly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under image canvas size, and let's enlarge the size of my canvas from 900 by 850 to, I don't know, 1500 by 1200. I don't know. And so when I do this and I hit OK, what's going to happen is it makes more space that I can work in, that I can actually draw in eventually. Okay. My content itself stayed the same. It just increased the space around it. Okay. I can also do the opposite where if I take my canvas size, right now it's 900 by 850, and let's make it like, I don't know, 600 by, you know, I don't know, 600. What's going to actually happen here is because my composition cannot resize, if this is my original size of my image, but my canvas is going to be smaller than the size of the image, what's going to happen is some of the image is going to get cropped off. The way I like kind of explain it is if you have a photograph and you try fitting it into a picture frame that's too small for the picture, you can't fit the picture in it, right? And so the only way to do it is like some of the image is just going to get cropped off based on based on the picture frame. So it's like if I had this, but I'm changing it to this, but the image itself, the picture of the deer is not allowed to resize. It's not allowed to be bigger or smaller. The only way to keep it is that some of the picture of the deer is going to get cropped off. Okay. Hopefully that kind of made sense. So if I hit OK, you can see how I'm left with just a deer butt here. Everyone loves a good old deer butt. All right. So, this is how you can crop and also play around with the composition. Um, All right, I want to talk about how to what the formats, the raster formats are for Photopea. So Photopea is a raster editing program. By raster, what I mean is that it builds photos using pixels. Okay, I'm inside of Photopea right now. These are my pixels. So any program that uses pixels would count as a raster editing program. So like for instance, Adobe Photoshop, we're using Photopea. You may have heard of Clip Studio Pro, even old school, super old school MS Paint, GIMP, if you've heard of that. These are all raster editing programs. They all open up images that are based on pixels and allow you to edit photographs based on pixels. Okay. So I would call these raster editing tools, applications, whatever term you want to use. A format image format where the data is saved in pixels is what we would call a raster image format. So I'm sure you guys have all heard of a JPEG. A JPEG is an image that saves its data as pixels. Okay. For Photopea, its default format is the Photoshop document or the PSD. So if I were to make my own composition and save it, you'll notice it saves as a Photoshop document. Because Photopea is browser based, if you were to save it, my document, notice how it has the .psd extension. It would actually download from the browser into your project. So um, here's where my file got created. There it is. Okay. Sometimes you might want to convert your one raster format into another. Now we're eventually going to work with Adobe Photo or Adobe After Effects, which can work with different types of raster formats. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say you're working with a different program that doesn't accept certain formats. You might want to convert one raster format into another. So the way I kind of think of it is like kind of like converting languages. So I could take the phrase hello and convert it into different other written languages with different, Spanish, French, Thai, uh, Russian, whatever. In the same way, we can take your image data and convert it to different raster formats. Okay. So different raster formats you might be able to use include JPEG, PNG, TIFF, WebP, so on and so on. I'm not going to go through all the different formats, but I do want to show you how you would export those out of Photopea. The way I would suggest it is you're going to have a document. Let's go here. And to convert, its default is a PSD. What I'm going to do is go under File, Export As, and you'll notice it actually gives me different raster formats. This include PNG, JPEG, WebP, GIF, AIF, TIFF. These are all raster formats that you can work with. I don't even know what an EMF is, if I'm being 100% honest. It's not a common, raster format. Let's say I was going to save this as a JPEG, which is a pretty common raster format. I'm going to hit save, and I'm just going to give this a name. I'll call this example, you know, JPEG. When you save, each format has its own sort of properties for saving. I'm not going to go through every property because we don't have to get that deep right now. In terms of a JPEG, the quality is how much quality there is for the image. The higher the quality, the higher the size, the bit larger the size of the file. I would say 70% is probably good for most people. I'm going to hit save. It's going to download that. And then my image, which was a Photoshop document, or a PSD, got converted into a JPEG. Okay. I'm going to go and take this and let's convert this into a GIF file. A GIF is another type of raster format. Once again, I'm not going to go through all the settings here. Let's just call this example GIF. Make sure under format, I have it set to the GIF format. These are various, formats I can use. It's trying to get me to give him some money. And there's my file as a GIF format. And just be aware that you can actually bring these back into Photopea if you want. So I'm actually going to go bring these raster formats that I just created back into Photopea by doing File Open. And let's grab them. So they're in my downloads folder. All right. This is a JPEG. This is a GIF. So, first thing I'm trying to get across here is there are many different types of raster image formats. Okay. You may have come across some of these in your time on the internet. JPEGs are pretty common. PNG files are pretty common. These days, WebP and AFF are pretty common. They're all different formats that save image data as pixels. Okay. Um, that being said, even though they all do the same thing, they are a little different from one each other. And so this goes back to kind of, this idea. I kind of like to use the idea of languages because I think it's kind of an apt kind of approach, which is like if you've ever converted from like English to, I don't know, Japanese or Japanese to Swahili or whatever, sometimes like things don't translate like 100%. Like, they get the gist of it, but it's like there's certain phrases or concepts that are like that don't exist in other languages or they're harder to translate exactly. And that's kind of the same here, where it's like when you translate from a PSD to a JPEG or from a JPEG to a PNG or whatever, it's like you're generally converting the data, but sometimes some of that data concepts get lost. Okay. So for instance, here in this PSD file, I want you to notice how there is something here called layers, and I can actually separate out this data. Do you see how this is separated into areas? We'll talk more about this in the next module. But in JPEGs, you see how all of that data got lost? Because JPEGs don't understand the idea of separate areas. They don't allow for layers. So when I converted from here to here, I lost all that ability to separate the data. Okay. So I'm just trying to show the difference between, even though they're both technically raster formats, they don't work exactly the same. Here in this is a GIF file. GIF is another raster format. And I want you to notice that, like, you see how my image kind of gets this banding here? Kind of looks like a graphic from like an early 90s computer game or something, whereas I don't have that issue here. So why do I have this problem? And the problem is that, well, GIF images or GIF, however you're supposed to, depending on who you talk to, can only have 256 colors, whereas sorry, not PNG, but a Photoshop document, PSD format, can have literally millions. Okay. So when I converted from, say, this file into this, I'm converted from literally millions to like 256. So you can understand, like, when you do that, you lose a lot of image, color data. And so that's why my GIF looks a little bit like, not as clear as, let me try to get them exact. I don't want to compare apples to apples, so to speak. This is 400. Let's set this to 400. Excuse me. All right. So if we look at the two here, now they're try to get them exactly. You can see on the GIF that there's more banding. So like you see, you get this kind of weird gradation here because it doesn't have the colors to move between the two. Okay. So my point here that I'm trying to get across is, when you work in Photopea, I would probably recommend working with the PSD. It's a pretty versatile format. It can also work in Adobe Photoshop. It was created by Adobe Photoshop or by the Adobe Corporation. But there may be situations in your life where you can't use a PSD file. For instance, if you were trying to make graphics for the web does not actually not accept PSD files. So you might have to convert to another format like a JPEG or a PNG or a WebP or something like that. And my point here is just be aware that when you convert from one to another, it's not exactly a one for one. There might be some situations where some of the data doesn't transfer properly or it's rewritten in like a different way. And just be aware of that, okay? All right, so why don't you guys try that out? That was bibbidi bobbidi boom. That was 8, 9, 10, and 11, please. Okay.